Welcome back, everybody, to another Studcast. Wow, we had some good results, a lot of compliments, great views on the last one. To remind fans, we talked about my first shoots, basically, at about the third grade, when my dad taught me how to handle situations with little young guys that wanted to bully me a little bit because they were older and because my dad was a wrestler, and a couple of the first shooting holes I ever learned. And so this one we're going to progress on up to a little bit older in age. We didn't get our first wrestling ring put up by my dad. And when I was 12 years old, we did have a ring in our barn in Memphis, Tennessee. And we're going to, future episode, we're going to talk about, we had one of the most famous people on earth who was real big friends with my dad, came to train with him in that ring, Elvis Presley. And we'll get to that one in another story. But this one, we had that ring when I was about 12 years old. My dad didn't teach us very much, but he taught us a little bit at that age about shooting. And he never taught us about anything else but shooting. Then as we grew a little older, got into high school, he spent a little time with me again, showing me more things. And my dad always wanted to surprise me. He wanted to do something I wasn't expecting. And so he was a big star out of Memphis, had been from 1960, 59 actually, to right around 63. In 1963, I was a freshman in high school. Lived in a little town in Mississippi called Loxley. No, not Loxley, I'm sorry, Potts Camp, Mississippi. Just outside of a bigger town called Holly Springs, about 60 miles outside of Memphis. And they had a wrestling match in my high school. When high school was a small school, small gym, but the gym was absolutely packed. And I'm in the 9th grade, and I'm sitting up in the bleachers with my buddies, and somebody in the middle of the match, about that end of the first match or whatever, and my dad was on the card. A guy came up and got the microphone, and he challenged all the wrestlers. And and I was like, wow, geez, I've never seen this before. This guy got guts, man. What's he think? And so. It was kind of an odd moment. Everybody went silent in the building. It's like, what is this all about? And my dad was the guy that came out, and he talked to the guy, and he introduced himself. The guy introduced him, and let him know, what's your name? And he let him talk for a minute, and he says, so you think you want to wrestle a wrestler? And yes, I do. Yes, I do. The guy was real, and he was his heart was all in it, man. Yes, sir. I think I can beat a wrestler. And so my dad says, well, I tell you what. He says, I'll wrestle you, but he goes, I got a boy in this building, and he's sitting somewhere in the building, and he says, Ron, come down here. And I'm like, oh, you kidding me? My God, man. I was like, wow, he's going to make a fool out of me, man. This guy's going to beat me or whatever it was. And so I came down, and then he says, take your shoes off. And he told the guys to take your shoes off. Ain't no radio wrestler can't wrestle in the ring on a mat with shoes on, slick shoes. And so, he said, I'll tell you what, if you can beat this skinny boy, he called me that in front of all my buddies and all my friends, the whole school's watching, and he says, if you can beat this skinny boy, he says, I'll wrestle you. So we got in the ring, and I beat the guy. I beat him with, Dad had showed me the fuller leg lock. The easy way, not the pretty way where you had to do the flip and the whole deal, but the easy and simple way to get the fuller leg lock. Grapevine, get the same toe and crank her up, and never fails. Greatest wrestling hold in history was the inside toe hold, in my opinion. Frank Gotch he was a world champion with that hold. That's all he ever used. That's all he ever beat people with, was that inside toe hold. And so I beat this guy with an inside toe hold. So things went on, moved on. A couple years later, junior in high school, the summer before my junior year in high school, we lived in the northeastern side of Atlanta, and Dad put a ring in the backyard. He got Charlie Carr, who trained my dad, who trained, probably 40 or 50 of the greatest wrestlers of all time in the little town of Dyersburg. Tremendous wrestlers. Great shooter. Charlie Carr was a tremendous shooter. And Dad got serious about Charlie teaching us how to shoot, how to wrestle. And I was going into my junior year, and Charlie was every day. It was a 7-day-a-week deal. We went to that ring every day. We spent 2 hours there whether we wanted to or not. And we really learned a lot of wrestling, obviously, in that year. So later on in that year, we lived out there just outside of Griffin, Georgia. We had moved to Griffin, Georgia, and that's south of Atlanta, about 30 miles or so. And a guy comes to the door one day, knocks on the door. And we had this happen quite often, but this guy was a particularly big guy. And he was a weightlifter. You could tell instantly. I went to the door and opened the door, and he says, "Hey, I'm so-and-so." And he goes, "Does Buddy Fuller live here?" And I said, "Yeah, he does." And he says, I want to wrestle him. I think, I can be a wrestler. And so I went and got Dad, and Dad said, he came, he talked to the guy, and then he says, "Ron, come on." And so we didn't have a ring at this point. And so we walked around the far end of the house, and the grass was pretty thick. And he says, "I tell you what," he told the guy, and the guy says, you lift weights, you're strong. You look like you're really strong." Yeah, I'm real strong. And so I was 6'6" tall, I weighed 160 pounds. I was like a rail. I mean, there was no muscle on me. And so he says to the guy, he goes, "If you can beat this skinny kid, I'll wrestle you." So it was the same kind of deal as when I was in the 9th grade, I mean, it's another one of those deals. So I figured, oh God, Dad, this guy, I'm wanting to tell Dad, "Hey, this guy, this is a big dude here, he probably weighed 250, and he was a big boy." So anyway, we started to wrestle, and I couldn't get the toehold on him because he was so big and his legs were really big, but I could grapevine him, which is a very it's a tremendous amateur move, but it gets you in a position to make people submit. You take that grapevine, and then you can go across and hook that alternate arm. You grapevine the right leg, you cross the body and diagonally, and you hook up to the left arm, and you can control anybody. I don't care how big they are, how strong they are. You can't beat them. You can't make them give with that hold, but you can blow them up. So that's what I figured I needed to do. I mean, this big guy, he's really big. So I got my shot. He went down on his hands and knees. I went behind him. I grapevined him. I went across, grabbed the Oklahoma ride. I flipped him over on his back, and he fought, and he fought, and he fought, and he fought. Then he got up. He stood up with me. He was really strong. He got onto his feet, and he stood up with me, and he jumped backwards on the ground and landed on top of me about 3 times. He did that about 3 times to me, but I just held on. I wasn't going to let go, because if I let go of that, he's probably going to beat me. So I held him for about 3 times, and then he got to where he was really huffing and puffing. He was blowing up, and he told my dad. My dad's standing there watching all of it, and he says, he goes, I can get him off of this, but he goes, I got to use the judo nerve hold to get it to make that, and I'm going to hurt him. I'm afraid I'll hurt him. And my dad was a strange dude, and he says, "Go ahead and hurt him." And I was like, "Oh, wait a minute here, this guy, he probably can hurt me, He may. I didn't know whether he had some fantastic move that was going to paralyze me or whatever. But anyway, he started digging his fingers underneath my armpit, and it hurt a little bit, but it wasn't enough that I was going to let him go. So he did that for probably 5 minutes, and then finally he was blown up. I couldn't beat him because, like I said, he was so big and his legs were so big, I couldn't get back and get that foot But I blew him up so bad that he finally said, tell him to let me go. Just let me go, let me go. And he got up and he looked at me. And then he looked at my dad and then he looked back again and he shook his head like, wait a minute, how can I not beat that little skinny guy, that skinny kid right there, So I was learning a little bit of shooting. Later on that same summer, Sputnik Monroe came out to visit us. Sputnik was a huge star in Atlanta. Sputnik was a huge star wherever he went. He was a monster star in Memphis, Tennessee. Probably the biggest name that ever went there. But he was a big star in Atlanta at the time. And he brought his wife, Sputnik brought his wife out, and we spent the afternoon. They stayed with us all afternoon. And somehow toward the end of the evening or the end of the afternoon, Sputnik got on to wrestle to me. And got there. Sputnik was kind of a cocky guy anyway. And he says, hey, you big, long string of water here, man. I mean, can you wrestle? You know anything about wrestling? And I said, well, a little bit, And, finally he says, let's do it. I'm going to show you some stuff, So Dad says, same piece of ground, same place we did it with me and the big muscular guy, now it's Sputnik Monroe. And Dad says, okay, go for it, Monroe, get the kid. And I went behind him and I took him down, Oklahoma ride, same hole, right? I knew how to get that Oklahoma ride. And I could blow Monroe up too. I mean, he would have to fight and fight and fight. And he did. He fought and fought and fought. And he was like, you could tell he was getting embarrassed to the point like, this is horrible, And finally, his wife came out of the house and she came out and saw what was going on. She stood there and watched about 5 minutes of it with Sputnik's blowing up and his wife finally goes, talk about humiliation for a guy like it was a top star, man. She goes, Ron, you're going to have to let him go. We got to go home. So my dad, he had a big laugh out of it. Sputnik didn't get a laugh out of it. Sputnik was really upset by the whole deal. But, he had to listen to his wife at that point. And so she took him home. So I had the opportunity as a young guy and a third generation wrestler and to get a little bit of training. And I'm going to get a whole lot more of it as I start wrestling professionally, especially, man, in my first year and the first 2 years of my career in the Snake Pit down in Tampa, Florida. But just wanted to talk about this one today. It gives you a little more idea of shooting holes and how it was to be the son of a wrestler. Pretty different deal. And my dad was kind of a nut about the way he handled things, but he gave me a lot of confidence at an early age that I could just about beat anybody I wanted to.